Welcome to For the Greater Good, a podcast brought to you by the Independent Grocers Alliance. And now your host, John Ross.
Well, hello, everyone. It's John Ross here, and this is the For the Greater Good podcast. And the whole idea behind this is to have conversations with leading industry executives about the things that they're doing in their companies and with their partners in order to make the world a better place. And by better place, I mean more sustainable, making sure that we're able to feed our entire communities. We're working on things like both community hunger and responsible forestry and responsible farming and all the issues where you would say, my children and my grandchildren would be proud of me for the things I did while I had the job that I have. So today we're talking to Wai-Chan Chan. He's the managing director of the Consumer Goods Forum. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you doing that.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having me, and looking forward to a wonderful conversation.
Oh, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So I would like you to start by introducing both yourself and kind of your background, because you've got a really fascinating background, but also explain a little bit about what the Consumer Goods Forum does. I'm not sure our full audience really knows.
Right, great. Well, firstly, thank you very much and welcome from Hong Kong. I'm actually in Hong Kong at the moment, just got out of quarantine, so Hong Kong hasn't got back to normal, but it looks like the US and the rest of the world has, but at least I'm out of quarantine. So welcome from sunny, humid Hong Kong. So I'm Wai-Chan Chan. I'm the managing director of the Consumer Goods Forum, and my background before I started this was I was a consultant, and I also was a retailer. So I was a consultant for many, many years. I worked for a company called McKinsey, where we helped many retail companies, in fact, and many consumer goods companies with their strategies, particularly in China. So I spent a lot of time, and I know that you have stores in China. I spent probably 25 years in China, actually working on, firstly, things like entry strategy, then growth strategy, and then profitability strategy, and then digital strategy. So that was kind of like my four horizons of growth within the business. So I did that for many, many years. And then I decided to get a real job. And I actually joined a company called Dairy Farm. So I was a retailer, just like you guys. So I actually ran shops. I ran 7-Eleven. So I ran about probably 2,500 shops, actually. Some very small ones, so 7-Elevens, as you see elsewhere in the world. And also Manning's, which is a health and beauty shop. So it's a little bit like Walgreens, but much more beauty involved in it. And also ran supermarkets as well. So I did that in China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, and I did that for several years too. And then very recently, I joined the Consumer Goods Forum. I joined the Consumer Goods Forum on Star Wars Day in 2020. So May the 4th, 2020, I joined Consumer Goods Forum. And so that's my background. So basically a consultant, a retailer at heart, so very, very similar to you guys. I love retail, and I've always been very passionate about it, and mostly based in China and Hong Kong. And I switched jobs to the Consumer Goods Forum a couple of years ago because essentially I wanted to do something that I felt that my kids could be proud of me for doing. And so what does the Consumer Goods Forum do? Well, essentially think of us as a big association of companies. So obviously you guys are part of a very important part of CGF. And so we have 400 companies that are retailers, such as yourselves, and also manufacturers, so the brands that you'd sell. And we join together to try and do things for the greater good, essentially. So very similar to the topic that we're talking about here. And we have a bunch of coalitions, which I can talk about a little bit more detail later. But essentially think of us as joining forces between retailers and consumer goods companies globally to try and tackle problems such as deforestation, such as human rights and forced labor, such as plastic waste, such as a sustainable supply chain, such as food waste, such as food safety, and also product data. So those are the things that we do. And also we have another initiative on healthy lives. So in other words, how do you get people to consume in a more sustainable and healthy manner that is basically good for them and also good for the planet. So those are the things at a very, very high level, just to introduce myself and also to introduce very quickly the CGF.
Well, the CGF is an industry association of sort of the Illuminati. I mean, your group is made up of CEOs. It's the who's who of the consumer goods and retail industry and grocery and quick serve, and convenience across the world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason why that's important to us is because if you think about trying to make things happen, you make things happen by getting CEOs to make decisions and then to help those decisions disseminate within the organizations and make sure that the organization is brought along at the same time as well, right? So you need to get some kind of direction from the top and then make sure that you socialize that idea, make sure that you get the morale and the direction right from the troops as well and move in that direction. So the reason why we have, as you would say, the Illuminati, we have this group of 60 people that essentially drive us forwards is because those guys are very important, and you need very important people to actually, decide on what's the direction that you're going to go in, and then to try and get everybody to move in that same direction. There are many different phrases that you hear, but one of the phrases that we are very particularly use a lot is, if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And so the whole point is we're trying to go together and far and make a big lasting change across those 8 things that I talked about. And there's quite a lot there. But plastic, for example, is one of the very important ones. And we are trying to get 40 companies together have actually said we're going to join together to do this. And it's all driven by CEOs. So they basically have the kind of the force for good behind the company, as it were, driving this direction. So that's the reason why we have the Illuminati, because the Illuminati is, to put it simply, is very critical to drive progress. Yeah.
If you go to a company and you see what they do, and you see like in the commercial world, if you see them like sponsoring NASCAR or something, or sponsoring Indy 500, right, whatever they do, and you trace that route back and go, how did you make the decision to be here? Often you will see the sponsorships of big companies match the personal preferences and passions of their CEO. Right. Same thing happens in terms of sustainability. So if something's really important to somebody, if they're a scuba diver and plastic waste in the ocean is driving them crazy, and they just so happen to be the CEO of a major consumer packaged goods company that manufactures out of plastic, now you've got someone whose personal passion aligns with their company's mission, and they can actually make something happen in a way that, a lot of us as individual citizens, we may not have the power to make that change. And that's what makes me so impressed about the Consumer Goods Forum. Every time I go or I connect with these people, you can see that they're not just the CEO or the general managing director or whatever their title. They're also passionate human beings who are there by choice, and because they do sincerely want to make the world a better place. And it's hard for me to imagine any other organization quite like that. I've never seen anything like it in all the boards and other things that I do. So I'm curious about you, and specifically of all the kind of initiatives, you were to say your number one passion is what, personally?
Yeah, well, this is actually a very difficult question to answer because I think of it like having 8 children. So I've got 8 children. This is the 8 coalitions that we have driving forward. And it's very difficult to say that I have a favorite child, because once I say I have a favorite child, we're all going to get in trouble, because all the other 7 children will then start complaining and say, why you've chosen this child as being your favorite one, right? So it's very difficult to say that I have a particular favorite and things. But I must say that before I joined CGF, one of the things that helped me decide to join CGF was really the whole, I guess, all the noise surrounding David Attenborough at the time, right? The British naturalist, yes, who he did so many different programs that. And I think one of them, and this is the one that really got to me, was when people were saying that there would be more plastic in the ocean than there would be fish by a certain date, right? I think that was one of the statistics that completely blew me away. That was one of the things. And another thing I saw was a photograph of a fantastic photograph of a little seahorse, and it wrapped its tail around a cotton bud, one of these Q-tip things. And it was basically using this Q-tip thing to kind of move around with, right? And I just saw those two, bits of information, those two kind of sound bites, pictures, and those things really hit home. Basically, we are ruining this planet that we live on. And so, I'm not going to say what I'm passionate about necessarily, because obviously I'm passionate about making things happen. That's the real thing I'm really passionate about. But before I joined CGF, one of the reasons that pushed me into the direction of CGF was seeing these things around plastic and around how people are just ruining the planet, and we've just got to stop this, right? We live on a very fragile ecosystem. The Chinese kind of understand it as yin yang. Everything's in balance. Yeah, and once things get out of balance, then things become very problematic. And it's up to us. It's up to these CEOs, the passion that they have, and also up to investors, people who put money behind the companies to say, right, enough is enough. Move in this direction. And also consumers, right, and also employees. I think there's a big upswell in terms of expectations from many different people. So number one, not necessarily number one, but the CEOs, they are passionate about something, so therefore they're going to drive it. Consumers, they're passionate about particular topics as well in different countries, and they're going to drive you and make purchasing decisions based on that, right? Investors, same thing, they're going to make investments based on this too. And employees, your staff, your store staff, your colleagues, everybody, they have passions too. It might be equality, it might be plastic, it could be environment, it could be many different ESG related topics, and they're going to drive those topics. And there's a groundswell of all these things happening. And you're going to you have to move in this direction, and we're proud enough to be. Well, I'm proud to say that we're trying to help companies move in this direction. So that's what. So to answer your question, John, what am I passionate about? I'm passionate about making things happen. Everything else to me is just talking, and you got to score goals. You can't map it out on a board. You've got to score the goal. You've got to win the match.
So when your audience there, so I might be sitting there and have Fisk Johnson from SC Johnson on one side of me and James Quincy from Coca-Cola on another. And if you think about an issue, let's just belabor this plastic waste issue. If you were to think about that one, those two companies, if they made a 1% improvement in either converting plastic products into recyclable or biodegradable, or switching to other materials that are more sustainable, just a tiny change in those two companies could make a change for the planet. And what's so fascinating to me, especially as a U.S. retailer, so I spent my whole career as a retailer in the U.S. As a retailer, you often get very myopic because as the largest consumer goods market in the United States, or in the world, right? You tend to see it through the lens of the largest market, right? And yet, manufacturing, labor supply, the exposure of how thin and fragile our supply chain is, as was revealed through COVID, and suddenly you start thinking about it and going, boy, we have to kind of win or lose together. So even if as a US-based retailer, IGA is not, we're a truly global retailer, but if you were just a US-based retailer, your suppliers are not. And so one of the other things that I love about what you do is bringing a global view to these solutions, because inevitably they are going to be global solutions. I think one of the topics I'd like you to talk a little bit about is human trafficking, child labor, and all of those issues. Those are probably, we're so focused during COVID on labor issues here in the United States, getting people to show up. But a much broader issue is this. If you could just talk a little bit about what that coalition does.
Yes, so we have a coalition called the Human Rights Coalition to End Forced Labour. So obviously human rights is a very, very big topic, and we're not arrogant to say that we can solve every single human rights issue. So we are very narrowly focused on forced labour, and forced labour has a very clear definition. Essentially, if you are don't have freedom of movement and you have to pay to get your job. So these things essentially are red flags that essentially mean that you've been you are in forced labour, so you're not free to do what you really want to do. And so what we try to do is we try to look at designing systems to human rights due diligence systems within your own companies. And those systems help you go through a process of making sure that every employee that you have actually has not gone through this process of being forced into labour for you guys, yeah. And so and as I said, we can't solve everything all the time. So we look at particular supply chains that are more prevalent for this. So, for example, we might look at things like palm oil. Right, if you look at the palm oil supply chain, and that might have more forced labour in it compared to others. So so essentially think of it as a big topic, we take one slice of it, we try and drill deep onto that one slice, we try to implement it within individual companies to try and stop this thing from happening, and we try to spread this to other people to help us join this journey at the same time. So those are that's in a nutshell what we try to do. Now, over time, we might want to expand it, but we've got to learn to move first, right? We've got to take the first few steps first, and we only moved to these coalitions of action a couple of years ago. And so we're still trying to learn exactly how to make them work properly. We have a very clear vision of what we want to do. And so at the moment, we're tackling piece by piece each of these individual problems, 8 of these individual problems, and we're trying to make those things work. And then once we've got a model that works, we try to expand it and try to get more and more people to join, more and more regions to join, more and more companies to join, and we try to broaden the topic. So that's the way that we think about it. And I don't know if I've answered your question about the human rights one, but it's really around human rights due diligence systems.
I wanted you to focus on that one specifically because I wanted to make the point about issues that appear to be global, but not in the U.S. versus issues that are truly global. And this is one of them. So if you say forced labor and you talk about people having to buy their job, what comes to mind is developing nations. Third world areas in which desperation creates these labor markets. And yet here in the United States, every single year, we have some story about migrant workers who are shipped up into fields in the Northeast or up in Canada or wherever, where all of a sudden we discover that the exact same thing is going on here locally. And that checklist that you described, right, that way of thinking about how do I understand how my suppliers operate, that big, global manufacturers are using as a retailer buying from local farmers. This is a checklist I could use locally. And the whole point of this podcast is to say, in an environment where I've spent the last 2 years inwardly focused on being in stock and making sure people show up and shopper and associate safety during COVID and all the ways we had to get very inward in order to survive. These topics didn't go away. These issues didn't go away. Yeah. And so if we can expose them and be inspired by the action of some of the suppliers who've made these commitments on these coalitions to make a difference through the CGF, then there may be things that we can do in our business today that can advance the ball both locally and globally.
I totally agree. I totally agree with that. I mean, it's not just a global problem or a problem with the developing nations, right? It is a problem everywhere, actually. Even in the US, there is forced labor. There is quite significant forced labor in the US too. So therefore, having the awareness about it and then, implementing the same tools that we use, because the tools are actually globally applicable. Yeah. So, and we're happily, you're a member, so you can share them and share them with you and use them and implement them, and you make a difference to people who are being shipped across borders doing things that they probably don't want to be doing. So it is an important thing, and the retailers can make a big impact too.
Well, so what we'll do is we'll take we'll do a small blurb on each one of the coalitions, and we'll just release it episodically through the year through the communications channels that IGA uses, so that our members can both be aware of and they can be inspired by it. One of the things, I was talking to the CEO of Unilever on one of these calls, and what I love about the way Alan talks is he says, sustainability isn't just altruism, it's good business, and you can improve your business. And I've thought a lot about that, and I love the way he talks. But the other conversation I have with retailers all the time is around differentiation. So I'll go visit a retailer and I'll stand in front of the store and I'll go, tell me why someone would shop your store versus the competitor, right? And, the things that independents say, because IGA is the Independent Grocers Alliance, so what independents say is we got a great meat department and we got the best high quality produce and we make stuff fresh. And it tends to be a service and a quality message, right? But then you go, well, how do people make that choice? How are they making the choice? And the other word we use is local, that we're local. Those are competitive advantages. But another competitive advantage is when you stand for something. Like if you say, unlike big national or impersonal chains, we stand for this.
Right.
Feeding the hungry locally or reducing plastic waste or whatever. And you were to put those signs up at the front of your store, not only would shoppers make a choice to choose you over generic competitors, But I would make the case that your hiring success and your retention success of bringing younger people or more passionate people into your chain, that you'd be very proud of your labor metrics at the tail end of it as well. And that's how do I fix the labor challenges I got right now?
Right.
Make people proud to work for you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think there is a lot of differentiation that can come from having a very altruistic message. Altruistic's the wrong word, but think of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, right? That's the kind of direction. That's the North Star kind of that CGF looks at. We obviously can't handle every single one of the 17 SDGs, but we look at a few of them, right? Food waste being one. I think that's 12 point something as part of the SDGs. So standing for something that resonates with consumers is absolutely critical, because you can stand for freshness, as you described. You can stand for localness, whatever the right description is. You can stand for those things, but also at the same time, consumers are making choices based on what you stand for, beyond just the standard methods of competitive differentiation, and many of those are related to SDGs. So do you have something that talks about forced labor? Do you try to have a low carbon footprint? Do you not have? Do you recycle plastic? Do you look after your staff in the right way? Do you care about nutrition? Do you care about obesity? Do you care about food banks? There's a whole load of topics that consumers are beginning to vote with their feet on, right? And what does that mean? That means they're not going to shop with you; they're going to shop with someone else if you don't show that you care about these particular aspects. Yeah, and so it's coming. And the US is a very advanced economy. Bits of Europe are also very advanced economies, and those are the ones leading it. And this is coming out very, very clearly. So there's a consumer element. So that drives you towards good business. There's a consumer element. There's going to be a regulatory element at some stage. There is also an investor element. The investors are demanding that companies move in a certain direction because they also think it's good. And so I talked about it a little bit early on, but there's a lot of different movements coming that essentially means that if you don't move in this direction, you're going to be behind. Firstly, but more importantly, if you move early, you have the chance to shape it. You have the chance to get an early mover advantage, and that's going to be absolutely critical, because then consumers will think you don't have to be the first. You never have to be the first. Apple, as you probably know, they didn't invent the smartphone, but they got it right. Yeah, and they probably made the best smartphone. So they may have not been first. I think HTC or whatever was first, right? But they're not around anymore. It's not about being first. It's about being early enough and being able to shape things and being able to get the credit for it. And I think that's exactly what needs to be done. So get onto this whole movement around sustainability. Get onto it early, because consumers are going to vote with their feet. And if you're not in that game, you're going to lose out. I think it's as simple as that.
So there's another consumer, and this is kind of my last point here. So there's another consumer in the independent grocery space. So you've got your customers, you got your associates, you also have your own kids, right? And I will often hear from an entrepreneur saying, my kids aren't that interested in the business. If you think about what you can do, if you own a one store, if you own a 100 store chain, it doesn't matter, right? In retail, the things we do have an instant and a profound effect. If you replace your light bulbs with low energy LED, your energy savings, you may have the biggest single energy savings in your entire community. Or you upgrade your freezer cases, or you make a commitment in the supply chain saying we will not buy from suppliers who do not treat their own employees with respect. Right. And then, the local grocery store is often the single largest contributor to the local food bank. We're feeding more hungry people than almost any other business. And yet, Wai-Chan, we tend to be very humble as a culture, and we tend not to pound our chest and show off what we do in a way that maybe our kids don't even know what role we play in that local marketplace. So, your key initiatives on reducing plastic waste and improving the health of our oceans, sustainable farming and sustainable agriculture that ensures that our planet can continue to feed everyone. And especially these issues around forced labor, right? And then all of those issues, they are global in nature, but we can have a local impact on it. And if this podcast just does one thing, and gets one retailer someplace to say, I could embrace a couple of these issues too, times the 1,560 retailers we've got in the United States and over 6,200 worldwide. If we were to do that, then we could make an enormous difference.
Yeah, I absolutely totally agree. I think that the beauty of retail is you are the connection between what we make as a kind of world and the consumer, right? That connection is there. It doesn't exist anywhere else because by definition it's at the retail front. What you sell, how you sell it, impact is purchased directly by the consumer. So therefore, whatever happens, I guess maybe the right way to phrase it is because you're that coalface with the consumer, you are actually the closest that any company has to reading the consumer, to shaping consumer behavior, to basically change the way that consumption occurs. And consumption can occur either in a sustainable way or in a non-sustainable way. It can either help forced labor or not help forced labor. I think because you have that interface directly with the consumer, you can actually make the most change because it is that interface that actually drives everything. I don't know if I made myself clear, but it's that last leg, and I think you have that last leg, and so therefore, I would say that the obligation is on you to try to do things better as well, because you do own that interface with the consumer.
Okay, so my last question for you is: you're retiring, you're at your retirement event, or some industry, Fortune or Business Week writes a story about you. And they would say in there, the thing that we're proudest of, Wai-Chan Chan, that he did in his career is what? What would you want that answer to be?
Well, it's a difficult question to answer, but I would like to think that I had an impact on sustainability in some way, making something happen, either on plastic waste, either on forced labor, either on food waste. One of the topics that we are driving forwards, I would like to be remembered as someone that made a small difference to the direction that we needed to go in, and actually made things happen. Because I think a lot of people talk about this stuff, but less people actually do it. And I like to be remembered as someone that helped do it, not shaping the idea or what have you, but actually doing it. Because I think at the end of the day, that's what matters. It's not about what you talk about, it's about doing it. And I like to think of myself as being a practical person, which is why I like retail, because retail is entirely practical, right? It's no theory about marketing and this kind of stuff. It's really practical, what you sell and how you sell it. And, it's really very practical. And so I like to think of myself as being practical. So, making a difference and making an implementation difference to some of these initiatives that we have that actually change the course of the way that we're treating our planet. That's how I like to be remembered. And we're getting closer and closer, but we're still not there yet. We've still got a long way to go, but we're moving in the right direction. And with help from people like yourself, John, and also the other CEOs, I think we can make a massive difference. And I think it's our duty to make this massive difference. And that's why I'm excited to be at CGF and talking about our initiatives, because I think we can make a big impact around the world.
Well, I think if there's anyone who could be the driver of success, practical success, it's you. And I'm a big fan and I'm a big supporter of both the organization and yours. And I'm just couldn't be more pleased with the direction that you're taking the company. It's very pragmatic and very practical. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to work with your team in order to create little entry links into each of the initiatives so that our members can learn about them and be inspired by them. And then we'll give a link back to the CGF website so that they can learn more.
Right.
And what I'd like to do is maybe a year from now, we'll come back and do this again, and we'll talk about something that you're proud of that we were able to accomplish in the last year, and we'll celebrate even the tiniest victory when
Absolutely. I'd love to do that, John. Thank you very much for having me, and good luck with everything, and hope to see you soon.
I appreciate it. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.